My fiancée arranged a bar meeting with her ex to test my jealousy. He mocked me for an hour while she laughed, then told me I'd passed. What she didn't know was that I already knew about their affair, and the real test was mine. I'm 32M, and until recently, I thought I was engaged to the woman I was going to spend my life with. Sophie, 30, was beautiful, charismatic, and terrifyingly confident, the kind of person who could make you feel like the only one in the room, then suddenly like you were the least important person she'd ever met. We met 3 years ago at a friend's art show. She was talking about philosophy and relationships, and I was hooked. She challenged me, pushed me, made me feel alive. For a long time I thought that was love, intensity mistaken for passion. But lately I'd started to see cracks. Sophie had a habit of turning every disagreement into a test. If I got upset when she cancelled plans last minute, I was too controlling. If I didn't react enough when another guy flirted with her, I was too detached. She said she wanted to know how I'd handle conflict before marriage, but it always felt like she wanted to break me just to see if I'd beg her to stay. A week before everything unraveled, she dropped her latest test. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, and out of nowhere she said, "I want you to meet my ex, Daniel." I looked at her thinking I'd misheard. Why on earth would I do that? She smiled, that same patient, condescending smile she used when she thought I was being immature. "Because I need to know you're not the jealous type," she said. "Daniel and I are friends now. I just want to see that you're secure enough to handle that." I laughed, genuinely laughed, because it sounded insane. But she didn't flinch. She stared back like she'd just made a reasonable request. When I didn't answer, she crossed her arms. "See? You're getting defensive already." That was how Sophie worked. If you didn't immediately agree with her logic, she'd twist it until you felt like the unreasonable one. I'd been through it too many times before, so I took a breath, smiled, and said, "Sure, let's do it." Because what she didn't know was that I'd already been told about Daniel. 3 weeks earlier, my best friend Ryan had texted me a photo. Sophie and a guy, tall, well-dressed, laughing, sitting close together in a quiet cafe on the other side of town. Their hands were touching across the table. Ryan's message was simple. "Man, I think you need to see this. That photo gutted me." Not because it was shocking, but because deep down I'd already known. Sophie's late nights with co-workers, the sudden secrecy with her phone, the way she'd started calling me by a tone that sounded more like tolerance than love. It all clicked in one terrible second. I spent days replaying it in my head, waiting for her to slip, waiting for her to admit it. But she didn't. She kept acting like everything was normal, smiling, cooking dinner, kissing me goodbye before work events. I almost confronted her that week, but something in me held back. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was clarity. I realized that if Sophie was going to play games, I'd play better. So when she brought up the bar meeting, I smiled and said yes. I told her I wanted to prove I wasn't jealous, that I trusted her completely. She looked thrilled, completely unaware that the game had just changed hands. The next few days were oddly calm. Sophie hummed around the apartment, texting constantly, claiming she was finalizing plans. I pretended not to notice. Meanwhile, I prepared. I ordered a discreet recording pen online, the kind that could capture HD video for hours, and borrowed a small audio recorder from Ryan. I wasn't planning to cause a scene. I wanted proof. I wanted to catch them in their own arrogance, to let Sophie's need for control become her undoing. By the time Saturday night arrived, she was radiant. She wore a tight black dress I hadn't seen before, her perfume the one I used to love but hadn't smelled on her in months. She smiled at me in the mirror and said, "Promise me you'll stay calm no matter what happens." I met her gaze and said, "I promise." She had no idea how calm I was planning to be. The day of the so-called test played out like a scene from a bad rom-com I didn't sign up for. Sophie was practically glowing all morning, humming while she made coffee, scrolling through her phone, and smirking like she knew a secret. I pretended not to notice, even though I could see Daniel's name flashing on her screen more than once. By noon, she'd spent an hour choosing her outfit for that night. She tried on 3 dresses before settling on a red one she'd never worn around me before. It wasn't elegant, it was strategic, bold, flirtatious, impossible to ignore. She looked stunning and she knew it. Don't worry, she teased as she spun in front of the mirror. You'll come out of this looking like a total catch. Daniel's going to see what he lost. I smiled faintly. I'm sure he'll notice. She took it as a compliment. It was almost too easy. The truth was I wasn't jealous anymore, not in the way she wanted. The love I'd once felt had quietly turned into something else, detachment mixed with disappointment. I'd already seen too much. That photo Ryan sent me replayed in my head on loop, Daniel's hand brushing hers across the cafe table, their shared laugh that looked too intimate to be innocent. But this night wasn't about emotion. It was about confirmation. Before leaving the apartment, I slipped the recording pen into the pocket of my jacket and activated the small voice recorder I'd hidden in my watch. My best friend Ryan was waiting 2 blocks away, parked in his car with a backup camera ready, just in case. He wasn't doing it for revenge. He was doing it because he'd watched me shrink under Sophie's control for years and wanted me to finally have the truth in my hands. Up to the bar Sophie picked was upscale, the kind of place where cocktails cost more than dinner, and everyone looked like they were trying too hard. When we arrived, she scanned the room and smiled like she was walking into her own performance. Then I saw him, Daniel, tall, confident, dressed like he was auditioning for a cologne commercial. He waved, his smile smug and practiced. Sophie. The way he said her name, casual, familiar, like it still belonged to him, told me everything I needed to know. She beamed and hugged him a little too long. I shook his hand. Ethan, I said simply. He gave a quick, dismissive glance. Ah, the fiancée, he said, as if the title were a joke. Ex-boyfriend, I replied coolly. Guess that makes us even. Sophie gave a nervous laugh. Okay, boys, let's keep it friendly. We sat down at a high-top table. The first few minutes were polite. Forced laughter, fake small talk. Sophie leaned toward Daniel most of the time, laughing at his stories, touching his arm lightly. I watched, calm, silent, letting the recorder in my jacket pick up every word. Then Daniel decided to push it. So, Sophie tells me you're an engineer, he said. That must be stable. He said the last word like it was an insult. It's steady, I said. Pays the bills. Right. He took a sip of his drink, smirking. You know, Soph always said she liked men who could challenge her. Keep her on her toes. I guess you're more of the dependable type. Sophie giggled, actually giggled. Daniel, she said in that soft tone she used to save face, but she didn't correct him. I sat back, smiled faintly and said, yeah, dependable's kind of my thing. I prefer loyalty over games. For a split second her smile faltered. Just slightly, but Daniel wasn't done. He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to make it sound conspiratorial. You know, Sophie and I used to have this thing. We'd test each other all the time, keep the spark alive. Guess she's still into that. Sophie blushed, and that was it. The slip I'd been waiting for, that one look between them, that shared smirk, told me everything. They were reminiscing about something real, something recent. I pretended not to notice. Interesting philosophy, I said evenly. Though I think some people confuse testing love with sabotaging it. Sophie's eyes darted toward me. Daniel just grinned. Hey, maybe you're right, he said mockingly. But at least it keeps things exciting. Don't you think, Soph? Yeah, she said quietly, tracing her finger along her glass. I knew right then whatever they'd been doing behind my back wasn't a one-time thing. This test was a smokescreen, a way to see if they could play me twice, once with betrayal and again with humiliation. But I wasn't the same guy who'd spent months doubting himself. I wasn't angry anymore. I was methodical, so I let them talk. I let Daniel brag about his business success, about how Sophie always inspired him to be bold. I even let Sophie laugh along, thinking she was in control. Every second of it went into the recorder. At one point, Daniel leaned closer and said with a smirk, You know, Ethan, Sophie and I used to come here all the time, back when she was with me. Funny how some things never change, huh? I looked at him, smiled politely, and said, Yeah, it's funny. Some people can't seem to let go of old habits. He frowned, trying to read my tone. Sophie glanced between us, her smile faltering again. Good. Because for the first time that night, I wasn't the one being tested. They were. By the end of the evening, Daniel was clearly drunk and Sophie was visibly uneasy. I paid for the drinks, thanked him for the interesting conversation, and walked Sophie out. She looked at me nervously in the parking lot. You're not mad, right? I smiled. Of course not. You wanted a test, remember? I think we both learned a lot tonight. She laughed, relieved. See, I knew you were mature about it. Yeah, I said quietly. You have no idea. When we got home, she kissed me goodnight and went to bed. I sat in the living room, plugged the recorder into my laptop, and listened to every word again, every smirk, every laugh, every confession. By midnight, I'd sent the files to Ryan with one message. Time to finish this. The next morning, Sophie was in a great mood. She made pancakes, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "See? I told you that wasn't so bad." It was almost laughable, how easily she could pretend nothing happened, how she could hum around the kitchen, acting like her little experiment had somehow strengthened our relationship. But I'd spent half the night listening to her voice on that recording. The giggles, the flirting, the way she let Daniel mock me like I wasn't even there. And then her tone when she said, "Yeah, we used to come here all the time. It wasn't guilt. It was nostalgia." So I decided to play along a little longer. "Yeah," I said as I poured coffee. "It wasn't so bad." "Daniel seems confident," Sophie laughed. "That's one word for it." I smiled faintly. "You've always liked confidence." She looked up at me, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "You're not jealous?" "Not at all," I said smoothly. "I'm actually planning to invite them to dinner next week. You know, to show how secure I am." Her eyebrows shot up. "You're serious?" "Why not? It'll be fun." She hesitated but didn't argue. That was the thing about Sophie. Once she believed she had control, she'd never question her advantage. Meanwhile, I was already setting the stage. I spent the next few days collecting every piece of digital evidence I could. Texts she'd sent when she thought I was asleep, emails under a work alias, and the time-stamped video of that bar meeting. Ryan helped me edit the clearest clips, trimming out the noise until the audio of Daniel's smug voice was crystal clear. Then I tracked down Daniel's fiancée, Isabel. She was a quiet, poised woman, someone I'd seen in passing on social media when Sophie mentioned Daniel's new girlfriend. I found her LinkedIn profile, then her company website. She worked in PR for her father's firm, Hayes Consulting. I sent her a polite, private email. "Hi Isabel, I know this is an uncomfortable message to receive from a stranger, but I think you deserve to know what's been happening behind your back. Attached are recordings and proof from a recent meeting between your fiancé and mine. I'm not sharing this to hurt you, only because you deserve honesty. Take care of yourself." Ethan, I expected her to take days to respond. Instead, she called that night. Her voice was steady but cold, the kind of calm that only comes from deep shock. "I listened to everything," she said. "And you're right. I needed to know." She told me Daniel had been acting distant for months, always working late, always on his phone. He'd sworn he was done with Sophie years ago. Hearing their voices together again shattered that lie instantly. We talked for nearly an hour. It wasn't angry. It was two people comparing wreckage, realizing they'd been driving the same car crash from different seats. Then she said something that stuck with me. "My father needs to hear this." I wasn't sure what she meant until a few days later, when everything detonated. Sophie came home from work in tears. "Daniel got fired," she blurted out. I looked up from my laptop, feigning surprise. What happened? His company's biggest client pulled out. Isabel's dad owns it. She showed everyone some kind of recording of him trashing the firm in that bar conversation. I hid a smile behind my coffee mug. "That's awful," she nodded quickly. "And Isabel dumped him. He's been calling me all day, saying it's my fault. Can you believe that?" "Oh, I can," I said quietly. "People tend to panic when they finally get caught." She frowned. "What do you mean by that?" I turned my laptop toward her and pressed play. It was the recording, Daniel's voice, drunk and arrogant. "You know, Sophie and I used to have this thing. We'd test each other all the time." Guess she's still into that. Her face went pale, then her own voice followed. "Yeah, we used to come here all the time." She froze, completely silent. I let it play for another few seconds, just long enough for the weight of it to sink in. Then I paused it and looked her straight in the eyes. "I wasn't the one being tested, Sophie. You were." She swallowed hard, tears forming. "Ethan, it wasn't what it sounded like." "It never is," I interrupted calmly. "But you laughed, you flirted, and you lied. Not just to me, but to yourself. You wanted control so badly that you forgot what love actually is. She covered her face, whispering, "I just wanted to see if you cared." "I did," I said. "Right up until you made it a competition." She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. "I already sent the proof to Isabel," I added. "And before you ask, yes, I know about the cafe too. The photos, the messages, I've known for weeks." Her expression twisted into anger. "You had no right to invade my privacy." I actually laughed at that. "You arranged a public test to humiliate me in front of your ex, and I crossed the line." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She didn't have an answer. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, and came back with her engagement ring. I placed it on the table between us. "You can keep this," I said. "It'll remind you of the one test you failed." She stared at it, shaking. "You can't just end it like this." "I already did," I said softly. "The night you decided my love was something to measure. I walked out of that apartment feeling lighter than I had in years." Ryan met me outside, engine running, a quiet smirk on his face. "So it's done?" "Yeah," I said, sliding into the passenger seat. "And it's just getting started." Because what Sophie didn't know, what Daniel hadn't realized yet either, was that Isabel wasn't the only one I'd sent the recordings to. I'd also made sure her father's firm got a copy, the same firm that had been planning to partner with Daniel's company. By morning, neither Sophie nor Daniel would have much left to test anyone with. The next few days felt like a storm that refused to stop. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Calls, messages, emails, half apologies that arrived too late to matter. Sophie tried reaching me constantly, alternating between guilt, denial, and fury. I ignored every attempt. By the second day, the entire story had spread like wildfire. Apparently, Daniel's company had been negotiating a high-value partnership with Isabel's father's firm, the same man who now had a pristine recording of Daniel, mocking his daughter and bragging about his games with another man's fiancée. By Monday morning, Daniel's career was finished. Isabel's father pulled every contract, and word traveled fast in their industry. A man who prided himself on his charm and emotional intelligence was now being called manipulative and unstable behind closed doors. Sophie wasn't spared either. Her firm found out when screenshots of her jealousy test started circulating in a group chat. One of her co-workers, a mutual friend of mine and Ryan's, told me she'd been called into HR for a reputation-related discussion. In her field, where image and integrity meant everything, it was career suicide. Ryan and I were sitting at our usual diner when he handed me his phone, smirking. "Dude, look at this." It was a social media post. One of Daniel's old friends had uploaded a photo of him, looking miserable with the caption, "Maybe don't test other people's relationships when you can't pass your own." I couldn't even find it funny. I just stared at it, numb. "You're not even smiling," Ryan said. "You got your justice, man. She humiliated you in front of her ex, and now the truth's out." "I know," I said quietly. "It's just weird. So I thought I'd feel better. And that was the thing. Revenge didn't feel like triumph. It felt like finally letting go of a weight I didn't realize had been crushing me." That night, Sophie showed up at my apartment. I wasn't surprised. I'd been waiting for it. She looked completely different, tired, makeup smudged, wearing the same hoodie she used to sleep in when she stayed over. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd once loved. "Ethan," she said softly, "please just talk to me." I opened the door wider but didn't step aside. "About what?" "Everything," she said, her voice cracking. "You have to believe me, I never meant to hurt you. I got scared. Things were getting serious, and I wanted to know if you were really in this. Daniel, he was a mistake. I thought if I could make you jealous, I'd know if you really cared." I stared at her. "You needed to destroy me to measure my love?" Her lip trembled. "I thought it was harmless." "Harmless?" I repeated, almost laughing. "You humiliated me in public, cheated behind my back, and lied to my face. And the worst part? I thought it made you clever." Tears streamed down her face. "I lost everything because of this. My job, my friends, you. Isn't that punishment enough?" I took a deep breath. "Sophie, I didn't ruin your life, you did. I just made sure the truth wasn't buried under your version of it." She wiped her face, whispering, "I loved you." "No," I said softly. "You loved control. You loved being adored, being right, being wanted. But you never loved me." She looked at me one last time before turning to leave. "You're cruel," she said quietly. "Colder than I ever thought you could be. Maybe she was right. Or maybe I'd just stopped bleeding for people who used my love as leverage." After she left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to her footsteps fade down the hall. There was no satisfaction, just silence, the kind that follows the final scene of a movie you know you'll never rewatch. A week later, Isabel reached out again. We met at a small cafe. Ironic, given that's where this entire nightmare began. She looked composed, though there was something softer in her eyes this time. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Not just for showing me the truth, but for how you handled it. You could have gone public." "You didn't," I shrugged. "I didn't need to. People reveal themselves without help." She smiled faintly. "You're not planning to keep doing this, are you? Testing people who hurt you?" I shook my head. "No, one test was enough." We talked for a while, not about Sophie or Daniel, but about starting over. She told me she was taking some time off, traveling with friends. I admitted I was just trying to remember what peace felt like. When she left, she hugged me. "You're not broken, Ethan," she said softly. "You just gave too much to someone who didn't know what to do with it." That night, I sat on my balcony with a beer looking out over the city lights. The air felt clearer. The quiet no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like healing. I thought about Sophie and Daniel, two people so obsessed with winning that they lost everything worth keeping. And for the first time I realized I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't care enough to, because somewhere between betrayal and revenge, I'd stopped being the man they tried to humiliate. I'd become the man who walked away. And that, in its own quiet way, was victory. It's been almost 8 months since everything went down. And sometimes I still catch myself thinking about that night at the bar. The way Sophie laughed while Daniel mocked me. The way I stayed calm because I already knew how it would end. But those memories don't hurt anymore. They feel distant, like a movie I once watched and didn't care to finish. After Sophie moved out, I spent the first few weeks in a haze of exhaustion. Not sadness exactly, just emptiness. My apartment felt too quiet, my evenings too long. For years I'd been living on edge, always waiting for the next emotional test, the next manipulation disguised as passion. And now there was just peace. Unfamiliar, fragile peace. I started small, got back into running, picked up photography again and spent more time with Ryan, who for the record still brings up the Operation Recording pen every time we grab a drink. He says it's the most satisfying movie plot he's ever witnessed, but it wasn't revenge that changed me. It was clarity. When you're with someone like Sophie, you start confusing intensity with intimacy. You start believing that love has to hurt, that chaos means depth, that jealousy equals passion. It took me years, and a spectacular betrayal, to realize that real love doesn't test you. It trusts you, and that realization changed everything. 3 months after the breakup, I ran into Isabel again. She was at a charity event Ryan dragged me to, of all places. We ended up talking for hours. No tension, no shared pain, just two people who'd both survived the same storm. She told me she'd finally confronted her father, set boundaries, and started her own small consulting firm. There was a lightness to her that hadn't been there before. We stayed in touch. No pressure, no expectations, just mutual respect and quiet understanding. It was the kind of connection that didn't demand anything, didn't need validation. Just peace. Sophie, from what I heard, moved to another city. Her firm's reputation never quite recovered, and Daniel apparently disappeared from the industry entirely. Maybe they ended up together again, or maybe they didn't. Either way, it's not my concern. Some stories don't need closure. They just need to end. The biggest change, though, wasn't external. It was internal. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't measuring my worth by someone else's approval. I stopped apologizing for being calm, for not playing emotional chess just to prove I cared. I realized that love isn't something you prove through suffering. It's something you protect by choosing peace over performance. A few weeks ago, I went back to that same bar, not out of nostalgia, but because Ryan wanted to grab drinks. The place hadn't changed. Same music, same overpriced cocktails, same dim lighting. But it hit me how different I felt sitting there now. The last time I'd been in that seat, I was a man trying to hold together a relationship built on manipulation. Now I was just free. Ryan raised his glass and said, "To moving on." I smiled. "To never needing to record anyone again." We both laughed, but underneath the humor there was truth. I didn't need proof anymore. Not because people won't lie, they will, but because I've learned to trust myself enough to see it sooner. Before we left, I walked past the same booth where Sophie and Daniel had sat that night. For a split second, I imagined the scene again. Her laugh, his smug expression, my forced smile. But instead of bitterness, I felt gratitude, because that night didn't just expose them. It revealed me, the version of myself that stayed calm, that refused to sink to their level, that quietly gathered truth instead of rage. That was the man I wanted to be all along. Now every morning feels lighter. I open my eyes without bracing for the next argument, the next accusation, the next test. I don't need to pass anyone's standards anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I'll think about what I'd say if Sophie ever reached out again. Not an apology or a confrontation, just a simple truth. You taught me exactly what kind of love I'll never settle for again. And maybe that's the real win. Because revenge fades. But peace and peace stays, so here I am, 32, single, rebuilding my life from the quiet up. No drama, no tests, just peace, friendship, and maybe one day, something real again. If I've learned anything from all this, it's that love isn't proven through jealousy or pain. It's proven through consistency, honesty, and showing up when it matters. And when someone tries to test you again, walk away. The right person won't need proof, that they'll already know.